Hello.
Nice tropical background there.
Yeah, I've got this. I've also got stormy seas and an aquarium. I got all sorts of things to keep me entertained.
Well,
Both of yours look nice too.
yeah, this is real.
So was mine.
Yeah.
I'm just not there at the time.
Good.
Esteban, is that your backyard? It looks like the Ordway Swisher station.
It's almost. So we may get some birds.
Great.
Yeah.
I might have little kids come.
Good. Well, yeah. Okay, should we start?
Yes. Yes.
Are we-
I think now
somebody-
everybody's here. I'm just checking if everybody can listen from us. And then I think we can get started today. Yes, that's good. So, hi everybody. We are glad to be hosting the second interview with the Early Career Working Group webinar series. My name is Aline Santos, and I am a PhD student at the University of Florida in the Horticultural Science Department. And also I am the Professional Development Chair in the Plant Science Council, a student-led group at the University of Florida. And we partnered with the NAPB to host this event. Today we are hearing from Dr. Marcio Rezende, Dr. Esteban Rios, and Dr. Alan Chambers, our assistant professors and plant breeders here at the UF. And to start our discussion today, we would like that you guys introduce yourselves, like a brief introduction with where you are from, where you graduated, and an introduction of your career trajectory. And then we could start with you, Dr. Rezende.
Hey everyone, good afternoon. Hope everyone is safe and well in your homes. So my name is Marcio. I'm a sweet corn breeder here at University of Florida, and you hear some noises. That's Crisper, my dog, who is around here, but I'll try to keep him quiet. So I joined the UF about 3 years ago. I have a master's and a bachelor. I'm originally from Brazil, and I have a bachelor's and a master's from there. Let's see what Christina wrote. Okay, yeah, Christina just said that feel free to ask questions at any time. I came to Florida to do a PhD here. I did a PhD in Genetics and Genomics. And during the PhD, I went up to actually start a startup company, a spin-off of the lab I was working on. And then I worked in the business for a few years. It's a genotyping company that supports breeding operations. And then 3 years ago, I joined UF to lead the sweet corn breeding program.
Okay, so we can keep going with Dr. Rios.
Okay, good afternoon and good morning, everybody. I guess some of you are still in the morning time. Well, I'm from Argentina. I did my undergrad in agronomy, so I'm actually an agronomy engineer. So I think that's part of the the applied part of my program is that I'm still an agronomist first and then a plant breeder. So I did my undergrad in Corrientes, where I worked with forages and with apple mixes for a couple of years. And then I decided that I didn't want to continue with graduate school for some time, so I joined a company. I worked for Philip Morris International in Argentina on tobacco production. So my state in Argentina will be somewhat equivalent to North Carolina in the US, where tobacco is a big crop. So I worked with them for 2 years until one of my mentors from Argentina pointed me into the direction of Dr. Anne Blount at UF to do a master's degree on apple mixes and forage breeding with her. So I came to Florida in 2011 only to do my master's. So after I finished my master's with her, I joined the lab that was basically opening with Dr. Munoz when Patricio Munoz, when he was hired as a forage breeder at UF. So basically I jumped from Dr. Blount during my master's degree, doing primarily conventional plant breeding to Dr. Munoz for my PhD, where I focus more on some sort of more molecular tools and genomic selection. And then I joined UF as a faculty in 2017. So it's been pretty much the same time as Marcio and Alan, about 3 years now, where I run the forest breeding and genetics program.
That's good. And now we can go with Dr. Chambers.
Hi, everyone. There's a few of you I can see. So Alan Chambers, I've been at UF for almost 4 years now. It'll be 4 years this August. Did my undergraduate in genetics and biotechnology at Brigham Young University, finished there in 2007. Did an internship there with Monsanto for 8 months. Actually turned down an opportunity to have my PhD funded by them to work in corn, and then instead went to Cornell, plant pathology, and graduated from Cornell with my master's in 2010, and then actually came down to University of Florida. Some of those questions that we were sent is, why do you make these decisions? When I left Ithaca to interview at University of Florida, there was so much snow in the airport parking lot that I had to find a spot where someone had been parked previously because the snow was 3 feet. And then I had to crawl up through my window. And then I came to Florida and there were people playing sand volleyball and I saw the palm trees and I said, forget this. So I came to UF, worked on strawberries, candidate gene discovery in an octoploid, which was interesting. Finished in 2013. And then went to work straight into industry for PepsiCo, supporting their Frito-Lay, Tropicana, and Quaker brands, mostly Quaker Oats. And then the option came to either move from, so I was with corporate in New York. It was either move to Minneapolis, Minnesota, or move somewhere else with a different opportunity. And I was very frustrated with my position there and did not want to move someplace colder. And then this position came up for tropical fruit genetics and breeding. And I've loved just about all of it since I've been here.
That's nice. Thank all of you for your introduction. So now we can open for the attendees questions, and you guys can send in the chat. They can answer any questions. You can ask for all of them or any of our guests specifically. Does somebody has any questions for our guests? And I think like while we wait for the questions to pop up, we already have some questions from the forums. So this is a more general question, it's for all of you, and then you decide who wants to answer before. But the question is, what were the challenges to get a role at UF? Based on in your experience, what are some of the key things you recommend to plant breeding students interested in joining the public sector or private sector to increase their odds?
Marcio.
Go ahead, Steven, please.
Well, about the role, I think that is a packet. You know, there are several things that you need to have in your CV and in your background to get an assistant professor job offer. I would start with, I think is the most common is research, or the most basic is research. You know, having, of course, research experience and papers published and conferences, talks, and those sort of things related to research. So basically that your background and your training in that area fits the job description and fits whatever the department is looking for. But also, you know, a lot of other, you know, soft skills like managing people and managing budgets, the network, you know, having, you know, connections and people that are willing to write good recommendation letters for you that will, you know, basically make you fit the position well. So that's I think these are the key aspects for getting the job that I had. I think, I don't know what Marcy or Alan think.
I think I would add to that that every position is slightly different, and the skill set that's needed for one position is not necessarily for the other. And there is some level of randomness, and it's really challenged, but there is also some level of serendipity that it turns out that your profile fits what the committee and what the position and what the school is looking for. So I think that's something that I've seen in many cases. But that being said, as far as preparing and differentiating yourself specifically in the public sector, most of the positions will have research in something else, and that something else is usually teaching or extension. So if you have any of that experience in addition to the research, in addition to the papers, that definitely differentiates you for a position. Let's say if you have extension experience, it differentiates you for a position in extension. It won't really help that much if they're looking for teaching, but those are just the nuances of the thing.
I agree with that's exactly right with what's been said. Good advice. And the other thing I'll throw out is it also depends on how you package your experience. You have to be self-marketing. So imagine someone like me coming from industry. I had no publication stream. I had no grants writing experiences, in industry. So, I mean, a couple of weeks ago, we had someone interview at our position that was coming, or at our center, and they came apologetically that they were coming from industry, and totally torpedoed themselves with saying apologetically that they were not coming from an academic background, where I would say you should have done the exact opposite thing, is saying I am unique and I'm distinct because what I've learned in industry, you can't learn in academia. You can't learn it by reading. So it's about having the right skill set and about how you package it and sell it.
That's good. And then here we already have some questions. So the first one is, how have you waived personal life versus career goals in your jobs?
I'll start this one. It's extremely important. I mean, I've turned down a job in Idaho because I didn't want to live close to some family there. And that wasn't a light decision, but if you're not happy in your personal life, you're not going to be happy in your job, and vice versa. And neither one of them should, take a hit at the expense of the other. And while you might have stepping stones, if you're looking for the long-term win, you do need to be happy in both, finding a career that gives you the freedom to have a personal life, as well as making sure that you take your personal time, take your work-life balance very seriously. Do an excellent job at work, but also do an excellent job at not working.
Do you guys have something to add to that? Even though I think it was pretty complete, I love your response.
I agree with that.
That's good. So now is a specific question for you, Dr. Chambers. Why did you decline Monsanto funding? Was it the crop or other reason, I guess?
Monsanto was really good to me. Really enjoyed the people I was working with. Obviously, they're doing amazing science. They don't have some of the hurdles that you have in other areas. I think it was more, we all have natural bents or angles or things that get us more excited. And I recognize that the major cereals and staples feed the world. And if it weren't for those, none of us would be able to have these types of jobs, but all be focusing on feeding ourselves. But I get much more passionate about horticultural crops and quality, and where yield is, yes, important, but I get much more excited for some of the things that make food more interesting and exciting. And so I took the short-term hit there, and everything worked out in the end. But yes, it was just a personal decision of, did I really want to be someplace I was happy versus, it's a great career. There's plenty of opportunities if you get to learn some of the major cereals, but it just wasn't for me.
Very good. Now for all of you, what is the most challenging part of your position and what is the most rewarding part?
Well, I can start. I think I will start with the most rewarding is basically people and students and being able to work with such diverse groups. You know, especially this time is when we realize how lucky we are to have such good team. You know, that you go to work and you know you have a good working environment and you know and seeing students and seeing people succeed in their career after they have been in your lab. I think that's something really rewarding, particularly especially with graduation for students, but also you know when you know for publications or for job offers and so on. And I think in terms of challenges is basically since we are in the public sector, probably funding for doing plant breeding. So we have to be really creative on writing grants and acquiring funding to do plant breeding and also do research in plant breeding. So that's probably part of some of the challenges. And then I like to have a really good diverse lab. And that means that I have people from different backgrounds and different places in the world. And that sometimes creates some sort of problems or challenges to manage people and make everybody happy. So I guess managing teams, managing people is also part of the challenge in running a lab.
I think I'll expand a little bit on Steven's comments, specifically about the funding. If you think about what I call an operational public breeding program to develop, in my case, inbreds or hybrids, it's very hard to get these funded because usually it's just a cyclic routine process and funding agencies are typically looking for cutting edge research and experiments that will advance some aspect that's unknown. So balancing creating experiments that can be used for both goals and then you can apply for funding, but then also advance the program. I think that's one of the challenges. I think probably the reward for everyone in academia in any position, we'll talk about the team, because that's truly, I think, a lot of what motivates us to be in a public job is see the progress of students. But specifically in breeding, I would also say that to me is really exciting to every beginning of the season to see what's coming out of things that we selected the previous year. That's that good anxiety that you're hoping that there's something good there.
Very inspiring. So, and then the next question is, what are the challenges involved in switching to a new crop when you start a new position?
You can probably
start with that one.
Please go ahead.
Let me throw out just real quick. I think we could also change a number of these questions around, and instead of what are the challenges, it could be seen as how do you apply your skill set, what you've learned, to do something that's never been done before. So that might be the challenge or the opportunity. But there are some levels where all plants are the same when it comes down to some of the DNA analyses and things. But at the same time, recognizing the fact that you bring a skill set to the table and you should be leveraging your past experiences to do something amazing in your current position. Go ahead, Marcio.
No, I agree. So just a little bit more about my background. I actually started my undergrad and master's and PhD working with tree breeding, and I did grow up part of my life in the farm, and I grew corn before, but I had never really worked with it. So there are challenges in learning the specifics and the technicalities. I had never crossed or pollinated a corn plant before, but I think as long as you approach it as not being worried to say I don't know this, and what I know is the breeding and the theory behind and how I can apply what I know. But it was a challenge, but it wasn't something that, I mean, I continue to learn. I don't think 3 years is enough to say that I know everything to know about corn, but I think approaching it like that, I didn't feel it was something difficult.
Well, I would argue a little bit that knowing or having the background or knowing how to grow the crop is something really important, and especially, let's say that not only about the crop, but the basic agronomic practices for the crop, and being a plant breeder, you have to know your germplasm very well. So that takes time. You have to learn what you have. You also have to learn what you don't have and where to look for those things. So, you have to spend a lot of time in the field, looking at the plants, looking again at what you have, what you don't have, what you're missing, and then partnering with people somewhere else to bring that missing part of your breeding program that you don't have. So I would say that it's not only learning about the crop, but it's also a lot learning about your germplasm. And that's a very challenging part.
That's a great point, Esteban. Every single crop, there's this foundational information you have to build. So if you're working on more than one crop, you have to build up that what don't we know expertise. And every new crop we pick up, then you think about the introduction section for that next chapter or the next manuscript. You have to do all the background on every crop that you publish on. So that can be challenging. That's a good point.
So our next question is actually two questions in one. And University of Florida Horticultural Science seems to hire former PhD students quite more often than other universities. Do you have any ideas why this is the case? And did you apply to other universities? What makes your strength and weakness of your CVs? Actually, it's 3 questions. Like, you guys decide how you want to answer.
How many of us did all 3 of us do our PhDs here?
Yes.
Look at that. Okay, so this looks like we've got some data here to support this. Let me throw out that there are some things that UF does really well, and one of those is horticultural breeding, horticultural crop breeding. There's a few very excellent programs across the nation and maybe across the world, but to have this concentration of plant breeders in horticulture is rare, and so you get a very good base here. There's also some networking and things like that happen here. When people know you and trust you, that's a little bit of a plus on your application. Applying to other universities, I'm not really bent towards academia, which is funny because I'm in academia. So I'll leave that to somebody else. I've applied to a lot of different companies, that's for sure. And strengths and weaknesses of your CVs. If you see a weakness in your CV, fix it before it's a big problem. There shouldn't be a glaring hole in your CV when you send it out. So you should be thinking about how you can compensate or fix those while you're still developing your skill set. But I mean, if there's this particular job that you love, that you want to do, then you got to make sure you're the best candidate by having that background, some type of background on your CV.
I'll just add that I think it goes back to one of the first comments from Alan, that a lot of CV and job application is how you package yourself and identifying what could be perceived as a weakness and just write in a way that highlights what are your strengths. So I don't know how was my selection process, but I would imagine that the lack of experience in corn specifically could be perceived as a weakness. But I tried to explain how all the other crops that I had worked previously collectively would give me a good background to bring something new. Whether they helped or not, I don't know. But I think it's a lot about how you identify what you think or could be your weakness and package in a way that well received.
So for the first question, I think I will echo what Alan said, but I would extend that to other departments as well, not only horse science. And I think that one of the greatest strengths that we have as a plant breeding program, I would say, is the diversity of crops and the diversity of people running those programs. I think we have one of the largest breeding programs in the nation, more probably, again, competing with some few other universities. And we have perennial crops, we have diploid, polyploids, we have all sort of different variety of biologies that make our graduate students getting a really good training. So that means that our graduate students are really competitive at national level, and that's probably why perhaps we also get hired at UF, is because we have the expertise and the knowledge to run these programs. And again, in terms of weaknesses in your CVs, we all gonna have weaknesses in our CVs. And again, is the same comment. You have to put everything together depending on the job that you are applying for, and you know, depending on the job position, you will have weaknesses, and it's your decision to apply it or not. But as Alan said, if it's something major, you will probably need to start thinking about fixing it and be proactive on that sense.
Very good. Our next question is for Dr. Chambers. And you work on several niche plans. How do you handle smaller grants, specifically towards developing a tenure pocket?
Everything counts. I mean, so, and you also, there's room for creativity as well. I mean, so I've had one grower that donated probably $300 and some thousand in kind contributions to my program. It's not a traditional grant, but that's a lot of money that I didn't have to spend or find to do the research. We've got another project in vanilla where, because of time, hours, reagents that got the data that they gave to me, was worth another almost $500,000. So there's things like that that's a little more creative. And I would say that I leverage it as a strength that I have so many crops, because it doesn't take a lot to get publication quality material in a lot of the tropical species. You can do almost anything and publish, as long as you're being focused, you're being clear on your objectives. It's just like any other program where you've got a series of questions you're trying to answer, and then packaging that and getting it out. So whether it all comes in small dollars or big dollars, big projects or small projects, you make it count. It all counts.
That's good. And now for all of you, how you define order of importance in your field of work, and how you manage these times to fit a limited schedule?
Can you repeat that? So how do you define
order of importance in your field of work, and how you manage these times to fit a limited schedule? I believe it was mentioning like publications, experiments, teaching. I think it's that.
Well, I think it relates to time management and prioritizing work, which is a constant challenge, I guess.
And I think there's also, I know Marcio and Esteban, if you guys think of this the same way, there are some things I've been able to get out of the deans for what is actually expected of us, even though they try to keep it very obscure, and they always want more, 10 times more, but you can't always have it. And so you have a number of publications. For my program, or my allotment of time, they're expecting 4 publications a year is good. So if I'm up to 6 and it's the middle of the year, it's time for me to put that energy somewhere else, my time into, maybe I need some more money, or be a better advisor to my students or something. That's not something you can do once a year. But I think no matter where you go, there's always the priorities, and you keep the balance, and hopefully you can keep on top of everything well enough. How do you find, and then the other question was, how do you manage time with a limited schedule? Everyone's got the same amount of time in the day. So sometimes, so I've got this rule where sometimes 80% is good enough, and you send it away, because the final 20% is going to double the amount of time it takes to do something. Not everything has to be perfect. And so the people who are wise will know the difference of when you have to have something that's nearly perfect, and when something doesn't need to be, when it's close enough. And as well, if you've got a good team, it's easy to bounce around and leverage people's strengths to get the work done.
Yeah, in my case, so I try to divide my time into about half of the time I put to research go to field breeding and to spending time in the field and to analyze, looking at data that's coming from the breeding program. And then the the other to actually look more into research projects, publications, grants. And now it's very flexible throughout the year. That changes. And if I got grants last year, and my goal and my deliverables are TMP and I know what I need, and grants is one element. If I check that box, that reduces in my priorities. But what Alan mentioned is very important, and I've seen in several students how you want to do the best possible and be as perfectionist as you can, but as long as that doesn't hinder your ability to deliver on all the deadlines that you have. And then if that's the case, that could be a situation where you're spending more time than you need to. And that compromises then work-life balance, and then you're working till late, and then you're working weekends, and just create like a loop that's hard to get out of it. So either knowing when to say no and committing to new projects, which is also important, because if you take on all the responsibilities, you're just not going to be able to manage that regardless. But also identifying when to deliver one in favor of working on the other. It's important. I don't think there's a science behind it, though. It's kind of learned on the fly.
Okay. So our next question is also for all of you. Do you see being a plant breeder as your end career, or do you see yourself moving into another job or position in the future? Tricky one.
I don't like to 5 years ago, I didn't know I was going to be here, so I don't like to plan that far in advance. But as of right now, I would be happy if I end my career as a plant breeder. That's for sure.
Yeah, same thing. At least in the short and near term, I see myself as a plant breeder, but you know, in the longer term, you know, things can change. It's always good to have a plan, but it's always good to then look for opportunities and adjust the plan based on opportunities that may arise in time.
Also funny, so we have a diverse clientele in South Florida, so people that have retired from being lawyers or teachers or any number of things, and they go into ag. It's funny that when plant breeders retire, they breed plants in their backyards. And I think that says something about the passion that we have. It's something we enjoy doing. Whether you're doing it at one institution or another, maybe that's a more relevant question than actually whether you like being a breeder or not. I think most of us feel very fortunate that we're getting paid to do this.
Okay. Next question also for all of you. Your breeding programs are more towards release varieties or breeding genetics research studies, or a combination of both?
The last.
Go ahead, Esteban.
Well, the last. I mean, we are breeding, but we are also part of the university, and we have to do research. So I like to think that, as Marcio said, I divide my time 50% on research and 50% on breeding itself towards targeting cultivar releases, but then also bridging those two different activities into one, so I can I can be more efficient in terms of time management. But we have to do both, and there are crops, like Alan and I work with different crops, so there are crops that we can do both at the same time. There are crops that you can do only one of them, let's say research, and then there are certain crops that you can only put some effort towards phenotypic selection. So there is no time for everything, and then that's a good part that, or the advantage that we have, is that we can decide and make those decisions and place effort in certain areas or others, but we have to do both.
Yeah, that's great, Esteban. I totally agree. And I'm not sure if in agronomy you were counseled the same thing, is that breeders don't get tenure for breeding. And so you have to do the genetics, the research as part of the breeding program, because you have to get those manuscripts out. I mean, if I was a straight up mango breeder, I would have my F1 producing fruit, the first generation of fruit, when my package was due. There's just no way that I could get cultivars released and keep my job on some of these long-lived perennials. So the answer is both, but I think you've got the short term to keep your job, and the long term is always moving that needle to try and produce something that you can release.
Okay, again for our panelists, how can grad students make connections with potential employers in industry before getting to the end of their program?
I can start with a story. I'll be quiet for a little bit. So that's how I got my job at PepsiCo. We had, at the time, he was working for Syngenta, an industry rep, and he came to UF, Portside, to talk with that one guy, Kurt Hanna, about access to germplasm, sweet corn germplasm. And then there was a dinner, and they said, is anyone interested in going to dinner with this industry rep? And I was like, sure, can graduate students go? And they let me go, and I got a free meal, and he remembered me. So 2 years later, I was like, hey, I'm looking for jobs. I had emailed him a couple times in the transition, and during that time, he had moved into PepsiCo, where he's doing similar work, but for a major food and beverage company. And just that one interaction got me hired into the company. So you'll find some of these random events when industry reps are around. Go and say hi, introduce yourself. It doesn't have to be anything phenomenal. I don't think I did anything than smile, introduce myself, and express interest in this guy's program, but he remembered me because I was the only student at this dinner. So when you go to professional conferences, seek out the industry reps, say hi, introduce yourself, and go on to the next one. And don't worry if you mess up, because you've got plenty of these opportunities. And also keep in mind, if you do send cold communication, LinkedIn, email, whatever, a lot of times in industry, it's nice to get a break from the mundane stuff that we had to handle. And to be able to interact with the student was enjoyable. And so don't think you're being a burden. If the person's responding to you, keep up the conversation every so often just to keep you fresh in their mind.
Yeah, just to follow that up with a story. I have a friend who, when she started her PhD with me, her goal, she knew exactly what she wanted to do from day one, which was to go work for one of the C companies. That was her main and almost only goal. So she spent 4 years going to as many conferences as she could and approaching everybody. And if you would see that researcher, that salesperson, or that company person the year before, she would go and say, hey, do you remember me? Some people wouldn't remember her. He said, yeah, we talked last year. We talked this, and that. And then she applied to one of these very competitive programs to go to industry, like an emerging leader of sciences. And in talking to the human resources director, he told me that he got so many calls referring her to that position from internally, from people from the company that say, hey, this person, I've met her for several years, and that was a main factor in getting her the job. So I think just don't feel embarrassed or try it to just approach and say hi, and the majority of people will be happy to talk.
Well, I just want to add, attend NAPB meeting every year if possible. Talk to the industry representatives, all of them, most of the companies are there, they are attending. So be part of the early career working group or the graduate student working group at NAPB, and also to other in other societies such as crop science or horse science society. So be present, be proactive, and present yourself, sell your research, and how you can be of value in their institutions.
Let me just add something else too. Create a LinkedIn account for you, and to me, I think it's a great opportunity to, that moment right after you met someone, you send an invite, put a little message as who you are. Maybe the person doesn't remember. Say, hey, this is me. We talked last week. That creates you link the face to the name, and then it just makes it easier for people to remember.
And keep your content appropriate. We do check. And if there's any smudge on there, then you go into a B pile of candidates. It's important.
Okay, another question for all of you. As a leader and head of your breeding program, you have to build your own team and manage people. Since graduate students are probably the most frequent personnel rotation in your team, what are the key traits you look for when recruiting new people?
Found the question. Okay, I'll start on this one. Most important things or skills you consider in a graduate student. This is going to really depend on the faculty. For me, exam scores are in the good enough category. Are you passing some type of competence? I hire very strongly based on personality. I can teach a nice person to do a lot of things, but I'm not here to train someone how to not be a jerk. And there's a lot of people out there that are just not going to jive well in my team, and I can't poison my team with people that aren't good team players. There's also, I mean, just the first interaction you have with someone, you can kind of see how quickly their mind is working, how they're processing, if they're listening to you. I think those types of soft skills are very important. So I guess it's a mixture of showing that you've got some competence in skill sets. Obviously, it has to match what I have in mind for a particular project, what I've got funding for. I've had people with mammalian experience want to come in with plants, and it's not the same. I mean, you could see some of that transition, but obviously didn't sell themselves very well. So it's personality, it's skill set, and then those other soft skills.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think I have too much to add. Some personality can ruin not only that individual relationship, but the entire team. So that's why it's so important. I joke that I think the same way there is a genotype by environment interaction, there is a mentor by mentee interaction. And I know my style is pretty hands-off, and therefore I try, if I perceive that someone would require a more close micromanaging type of mentoring style, that's probably not a system that would work well in my lab. So that's also something that I take into consideration. Generally speaking, I think there are two other things that I try to grasp from interviews and conversations. One is proactivity. Are you gonna basically do things that you were not asked to do? Did you study about the program, the research program, and are you actually gonna contribute to the team? Because as a PhD student especially, I mean, I treat all my students as researchers in my team and not just someone that's there to do what I tell them to do. So I want that proactivity to come back, and so we actually grow together. And the other one is creativity. It goes back to like why are we doing science? Is to be thinking about different approaches, different methods, different ways to increase genetic gain or to just be more successful. And a lot of that, I'm searching for that in interviews.
It's like part of that question was also that we consider a graduate student of the plant breeding program must develop to be successful in their professional lives. It's all the things I think we just said. You have to be excellent in what you do. You have to be a good person. You have to work well with others. And you have to present yourself well. Being able to communicate with people is extremely important.
Yeah, I would add that communication skills are probably something that we look for verbally and written. So if you can prove that you're good at writing, I would say that will count more than if you have good grades. So if you were able to do a couple of rotations or some sort of work in previous labs, so you have this experience, but you were able to provide, you know, it doesn't have to be a lead author on a paper, but if you have a publication or if you have presented research somewhere and you were the person, you know, preparing the poster or writing the paper or presenting some sort of communication skills are good, and I would count more towards that than grades or GPA.
Okay. And then our next question is for any of you is, could anyone elaborate on a specific time management approach you find effective?
I'll throw out one snippet. Esteban, you looks like you were ready too. So one of the things I was struggling doing was finding time, dedicated time for writing, maybe even just 2 years ago. And just as the day gets going on, people are always in your office, you're getting urgent emails, and all of a sudden, you know, it's the end of the day and you've got to go home. And so I dedicate now every morning, it's 2 or 3 hours. I get in about 6 o'clock in the morning and people don't start showing up in my lab until 8:30 or 9. And so that is my prime time to get the most important things done. So it's reserved for writing, whether it's manuscripts or it's grant applications. And so I think as long as I keep that balance, I'm okay with everything that's the most important things, and then everything else kind of settles out throughout the day. All of my meetings, troubleshooting, and then if I'm lucky, a little bit of time in the lab. But you've got to put most important things first, and you've got to carve the time out on your calendar and make it sacrosanct. Nothing can mess with it. Otherwise, you will spend all of your time on urgent but not significant things.
Yeah, and setting realistic goals in the short, medium, and long term also helps, and put that in your calendar or put that somewhere where you can see them constantly helps, you know, doing work every day towards those goals. So I know this is very difficult and it's one of the challenges, but it's something that setting realistic goals or anything that you might be doing is going to help you with time management.
Each one will have their own system. One thing that works well for me, in addition to long-term goals, I have daily goals. So I come in the morning and I say, okay, I want to accomplish these things. And then every so often, then I look back and I analyze if I'm not accomplishing them. Either I'm setting up too aggressive goals or I'm not being very efficient. And then you got to adjust one way or the other. So you analyze yourself. It's important.
Okay. And then our next question is also for all of you. Is any of your time spent doing side communication work? I know Dr. Chambers was on the Talk Biotech podcast a few years ago. Do you think that outreach experience will be more valuable in the future public sector candidates?
We've been encouraged, I don't know if this goes into agronomy as well, but especially in hort science, that we need to be involved in science communication. You've got the formal science communication through like a UFEDIS document, but because of this COVID stay-at-home stuff, I'm finally now posting content on LinkedIn and Facebook for different audiences. Being on a podcast, I mean, giving interviews, it's all part of the job. And if you can quantify page hits and views, then it goes into your packet. And so it's all good. But I certainly would keep it in perspective. Getting a publication out is much more important than spending a few hours on a post or something. But if it takes a couple of minutes to just give an update to growers, consumers, whatever it is around you, I think it's going to be increasingly important, especially keeping in mind that some of these people that are reading your post might be potential funders, if you've got a good network on these accounts as well.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add. I agree.
Okay. So our next question is, in addition to learn everything in classes, what are the most important things or skills that you consider a graduate student of the plant breeding program must develop to be successful in their professional lives?
Well, I don't think you learn everything in classes. You may learn some or most of your skills during classes, but I would argue that many of the important skills you will learn by going to the field, by running the experiment in the lab, in the greenhouse, whatever is that you are conducting your research, using some of the fundamental work that you might learn in class. So in terms of what is the most important thing, you know, there is not a single skill that will make you a great plant breeder, but I would say field work, being able or like to go to the field and see your plots and harvest and do all the activities that as plant breeders we have to do, crossing and selection and so on. You know, enjoying field work or that part of the job is probably one of the most important things that you need. Otherwise, you know, you will have to write and you will have to teach and will have to do the same activities with other jobs. But in terms of plant breeding, if you don't enjoy that part, it's going to be really tough.
Yeah, I think specifically to plant breeding, the more time you can get to learn the germplasm and learn the plants that are being planted, I think that's an invaluable skill. We talk a lot about soft skills, and it's hard to these are vague, right? But there are opportunities, I think, to get some of that during the PhD. Ask your PIs how they manage budgets, and how is money spent, and how is that controlled, and ask how are questions like this, like, but then you can see in undergrads, how are they hired, if they are hired, and whether the choices that you do to hire them reflect later on in what you see, basically their performance. Because these are things that often we have to learn on the fly, and you can at least put a little bit of thinking ahead of time that will give you some advantage. Just one more comment though, it goes back to the point for one of the comments on working with a new species. It's also going to be the case for any career in genetics and breeding of working with a new tool. So 10 years ago, there wasn't a CRISPR. 20 years ago, there wasn't genomic selection. There will be tools in 10 years that we don't know today. So being able to adapt, no matter where you will end up in your career, you will probably have to work with something that you're not trained, technically speaking, in the PhD. So I think that's something that just thinking about what does it take to learn a new tool or learn a new field, that will probably be needed.
Okay, our next question is also for all the panelists. Regarding soft skills, how did you learn how to manage teams? Just from experience, or do you recommend taking classes?
I have taken a couple of classes in the MBA program, and they were really useful. But then you also learn that by working and being, you know, a lab member, an active lab member, and understanding what is your role, what is the role of others, and how to communicate with them. You know, you can learn this. We all can learn this.
Go ahead, Marcio.
No, yeah, I have never taken any classes. I've read a couple books on it. The books just give as much as you really won't learn until you go out there and actually exercise it. I think I had a lot of good experience from that working in the startup company, because the mindset was different. I think students are generally self-motivated because it's their own career, at least to some level, self-motivated because it's their own career that they're investing time on. Depending on what level of personnel you're talking, they're there for the pay, and they want to arrive at 9 a.m., leave at 5, and that's it. And then basically your success depends on how well you motivate them to be passionate about doing what they're doing. And I got to do a lot of trial and error on testing things that would get people motivated. And it goes back to the G/E interaction. Not everything works in everybody. So it's also about learning how to read what is important for a given person and how you can use that to get that person motivated. I think it's an interesting exercise.
My experience was at PepsiCo. I was mentored for leading teams. So I was there. I was, you know, basically a team manager understudy, and then they gave me my own teams with someone making sure I wasn't messing up too badly. And as well as I had a pile of books that I read for my coursework. Everything from 7 Habits to Good to Great was another really good one with case studies from business schools. Now I'm wondering what classes Esteban took and if I should take those now, if there's another step there. But there are a lot of things you learn by doing. But if there's a way for you to not make some of the most common mistakes, then I would read the book or take the class.
That's very good. We're getting close to the time to wrap up this section. So we still have some questions to go, but I don't think we're going to take new questions, and we're going to try to go to the ones that we already have. But at least for me, it's been like very, very good to learn from you guys. We're going to go just for a couple of more questions, and then we can start trying to wrap up, okay? So next one is also for all of you. Some plant genetics and breeding courses have focused more on molecular breeding and our statistical genetics approaches. Sometimes I think the principles of conventional plant breeding have received less emphasis. What do you think about it in terms of breeders' career in academia or industry?
I agree. I've seen PhD programs in plant breeding where there's very little of actually field breeding. These are all tools. I don't think breeding will ever become only statistics and no field. I don't think breeding will ever go back, at least in a large scale breeding, will ever go back to only field and nothing else. In a way, that's one of the strengths I see here at UF is that there are a lot of us that actually have an applied breeding program. So at least for the audience that's at UF, you have the opportunity to go talk to, if you're interested in a different crop, go spend a day or two, or go talk to the breeder. I think as far as career goes, if breeding is something, if actual variety development is something that you want to do, you do need to get the field experience. Now, there's nothing wrong, and there are careers in molecular breeding, there are careers in data science, and those, there's just as much demand for them, and there's nothing wrong in going after those. But definitely the field, I don't think, can go away from a plant breeding field.
Well, I would add, I agree with Marcia, and I would add that most of those conventional techniques or concepts, you will learn with your PI. So if you go to the field, so let's say that you are a PhD student doing only molecular work, but your PI also does some sort of field work. So go to the field and ask questions. Go to the greenhouse where they're making crosses and learn to make crosses, even though it's not part of your research and it's not part of your, or the classes that you are taking, but you can find time and you can learn those skills if you are interested, if you go to talk to your PI or another PI that you know that has a very applied breeding program. There are opportunities, and it's the best, I would say it's the best way to learn, because you will learn by doing, by observing people doing it in a real job, and those are really, really valuable skills.
And things like genetics, genomics, molecular biology, it's all very easy to teach in a class, but I don't know if any of us have ever had a course on developing the breeder's eye, right? Or experience with, you can't replace it, but how would you teach that in a book? Here's a bunch of plants, stare at them, it just doesn't work. So some things are experientially learned versus here's a series of facts and figures, but it's all tools, and totally agree with what's been said. You can't replace someone who's actually out there doing the science, making the crosses and evaluating the hybrids, and everything else is just a tool.
Very good. And the next question is for all panelists too. Can you give us a few specific 5 years goals of your breeding program?
For each crop? Okay. Well, we are in academia, and the three of us are in our third year or fourth year, more or less. So we are in the middle of tenure. So at least I think, in the breeding program, also part of the tenure clock. So we have, very specific goals depending on the crop in terms of how I'm targeting certain crops more than others, because I know we may get a cultivar release and that will have an impact on my tenure and promotion packet. So it really depends, and you have to be really creative and strategic about how you choose the crop, how you choose, how much time you are putting, or how much effort you're putting in those crops. And you don't have to make the decision yourself. I would, you will have mentors hopefully helping you make those decisions. And again, be strategic and don't put all the eggs in a single basket. Try to diversify. And again, the long-term goal for us is diverse and relate to tenure and promotion again.
I think just to add to I think Juan asked for a few things specific. I mean, 5 years is not a very long horizon in the plant breeding world, right? But specifically in my program, I'm now attempting to implement and deploy genomic selection beyond research, but actually get that going in the program. In 5 years, my goal is to have that in a way where figure out a way by which I can fund that and have that recurrently running. It's just one specific goal.
Okay, so next question for our panelists again. If you could give one piece of advice to your past self on the first day of your current position, what would it be? What would you do differently if you were starting your research program over again?
A dangerous question. It breeds regret. Specifically, I'll generalize this to not increase my regret here. I generally hit the ground running and move.
Did we lose Alan?
I think so. If you guys want to keep going until we get him back. Oh, he's back.
Okay. The piece of advice I would give myself is take some time to get a good strategy before you start spending money. I don't live with the regrets of starting on so many species, but sometimes I think if I had too fewer, I wouldn't be hurting. And then what would I do differently if I was starting it over again? I know I have a lot of fun with all of my different crops, but I think you can always go back and be more systematic, more efficient, but you can't kick yourself for not being efficient and systematic to start, because that's how we live life. Maybe that's just me. Marcio and Estelle, I bet you guys are totally efficient and systematic.
I had some.
No, I think it's the same thing. But in my case, at least, it doesn't relate necessarily to breeding, but it was managing, as Alan said, funds. But not only that, but also understanding all the terminology and everything else that goes with grant funding. Accounts and managing those budgets and things like that are really important. And we often don't get the training in graduate school unless you are really, really proactive and you write your own grants and you are funding yourself through some, either NSF or some other agency. But I would say those are some of the skills that will help you a lot at the beginning.
Yeah, in my case, it took me a little longer to understand as well as I wanted my germplasm for different reasons, logistics, and looking back, I would probably have done things slightly different to get a head start on that.
Okay, we have 4 final questions. Do you guys still have some time to keep going for these last 4, or should I tell people to contact you through your emails? What should we do?
I'm good for a few more minutes if someone wants to stick around.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, so just 3 questions, and then 2 questions, because the other 2, yeah. two questions, and I think we can wrap up. So the first one is, during graduate school, were you preparing for academia or industry, or both? In other words, was academia always your goal?
No. That was easy. Next question. I'm either, you know, more basic in industry or maybe more applied in industry or in academia. I keep my options open. I think that's a good way to be. For someone like me, I do equally well in industry or academia. And for me, it was about finding a great subtropical location where I get to eat mangoes. And whoever gave me that first one.
I would say yes. For example, I TA'd several classes, and that was very strategic for me to have the teaching experience, knowing that I was going to apply for faculty positions, and teaching is one of, you know, in most cases, teaching is one of the requirements or job duties. And then also giving, you know, attending or participating in extension activities with my PI was something that I was doing on purpose to put that in my CV, knowing that at some point I was going to apply for a faculty position. So you have to be really strategic and understand, go and participate in job searches. That you will learn a lot by participating, by looking at reading packets, and understanding how, you know, people apply and how they get the jobs. So I would say the answer is, for me, is yes.
In my case, that was not the case. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to be working with breeding, but I certainly aimed for both possibilities of career.
Okay, and then the next questions for all of you. Your research has been funded sometimes by private company funds and sometimes by public funds. For instance, like profits, investment, competitive grants, capacity funds, from producer group funds. So have you seen difference in if or how the source influenced the research and the resulting varieties? And if you see any pros or cons between the sort of funding?
I'd say very much so in my program. Industry money is very different than academic money. And I understand it from both sides. My industry partners need something tangible that they can use to get their promotions as well, and something they can hand over to the company. So it's much more focused. They're much more stringent on milestones and meeting those milestones, because again, when your company is based on quarterly profits, you can't miss milestones. My experience as well is that industry spends much less time with the flowery language that academics seem to be addicted to. And so if you can't get your argument onto a one-page document or a two-page PowerPoint slide, and I'm talking with minimal text, you can't get it funded. So it's much more concise, it's much more to the point, and when the money's there, you take it as quickly as you can, because you don't know if tomorrow the strategy is going to change. Versus the academic dollars, where you have to demonstrate that you can talk for 14 pages about something and that you're the best person in the world, and then you have to network to get the dollars. But it can also typically be more long-term vision type stuff, like with the SCRIs, the NEFA grants, where you can plan for 4 years. And industry, in my experience, just doesn't have the appetite for long-term programs like that, unless they're funding it themselves for licensing or whatever.
The type of research that one or the other funds is typically considerably different. So I have an example where I have a project funded by industry to develop a method for delivery of CRISPR, and I submitted that idea to 2 grant agencies. The technical reviews were good, but they didn't think it was worth the funds. It was the same idea. It's just basically perception of whether how much that's advancing their mission or not. And then everything else, I agree 100% with that one. There are a lot more milestones. There are a lot more commitments on deliverables. We do, though, I think, just as far as UF, all or most, I think all of the agreements with industry, we have complete freedom to decide what to do with the data, to publish, to basically provided MTAs and things like that. But generally speaking, I don't feel like as far as how I decide what to do with the project is different, other than having to accomplish these milestones and deliverables.
Sorry. Now we get to our final question. Also for all of you, a famous Brazilian breeder say this: breeder does not choose a species. That is, the student must have training for work with any species. What do you all think about that?
Well, I think this is how we started the session today, talking about training and experience in the crop. I would say is true, but again, it's gonna take you a lot of time to learn about the crop and to learn about your germplasm. So if you have the previous experience, of course, always is gonna be better, because you, as Alan just said, you're gonna hit the ground running, understanding how to plant, how to grow, how to fertilize, when to plant, and several other agronomic characteristics. And besides knowing for which traits you look for, and understanding whether you have or you don't have good germplasm. So
yeah, I agree. I think we should be prepared to work with any species, but you probably cannot make too many changes in your career if your goal is to release varieties and to have a program. If you're just managing a team, then that's not the case. But that knowledge of it basically takes time. So if every 5 years you work with different species, it's going to be very hard to actually make a lot of progress in the
yeah, particularly if you're working with perennial crops. I mean, you will then never release a cultivar.
Okay, this discussion today was so interesting. I would like to thank the NAPB for organizing this webinar series. I would like to thank the three of you for your insights and career advice, and for sharing with us part of your experience and everything. I believe I'm not the only one that really enjoyed this webinar. Thank you, the three of you. I think it's very important for us graduate students and who is starting the career to listen from somebody that is in the next step and that passed through all of these already. Thank you all, and thank you for all of you that participated. This discussion was great because of you making questions and making this more interesting too. So I think now it's time to wrap up. Thank you, everybody. Stay safe and hope to see you soon.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. Thanks for attending.
All right, thank you.